Good evening and greetings, and welcome to the JCA Black History Month special, a conversation with Barbara Blake Hanna. Barbara Blake Hanna is an author, a filmmaker, and cultural consultant who has lectured on Jamaican culture at the University of Vienna in Austria, New York University Graduate School, Florida International University, University of the Virgin Islands in St. Croix, University of the West Indies, the Guyana and Jamaica campuses, and at the World Archaeological Congress in Curacao. Miss Blake Hanna trained as a journalist working under her father, Evan Blake, on his Spotlight and Newsday magazines. She immigrated to London, England in 1964 and trained as a public relations practitioner, working as a PR executive for the Jamaica Tourist Board and Jamaican government with Michael Rice and Company. She worked in the film and television production industry for more than 30 years, beginning in Jamaica with the JBC TV and continuing in Britain, becoming the first black TV journalist and a job as a current affairs reporter and interviewer on Thames TV daily evening program. This interview will be conducted by our esteemed Beverly White of NBC4 News.
Beverly White's current assignment includes reporting for the Channel 4 News. White joined NBC4 in 1992 from WTVJ, the NBC-owned and operated station in Miami. In addition, she has traveled for NBC4 on select stories such as the 2004 hurricane swarm in Florida and Alabama. Locally, she has been a steady presence on the top-rated 11 p.m. Channel 4 News for more than 10 years. White specializes in live television and has covered a variety of stories for NBC4, including the destructive El Niño weather system and the Santa Ana winds, plus recurrent Southern California wildfires, localized flooding, mudslides, and the North Ridge earthquake. White also covered the rise and fall of the baseball legend Pete Rose, and in 1998, the Democratic and Republican presidential nominating conventions. Her career began in her home state of Texas at KCEN-TV, NBC in Temple, Waco, and KENS-TV, CBS in San Antonio. White holds a broadcast journalism degree from the University of Texas at Austin. Throughout her career, White has shared her time and talent, giving speeches and presentations to colleges, community, and civic groups. A member of the National Association of Black Journalists, White is a past president of the local affiliate chapter, the Black Journalists Association of Southern California. LA's New York Times Magazine named her Best Local News Reporter in 1997, and in the April 2000 issue of Essence Magazine, White was designated a live shot diva. Beverly White lives in the Los Angeles area with her family. To our most appreciated audience and listeners, we bring you a conversation with Barbara Blake Hanna. Here is your host, Miss Beverly White.
Thank you for joining us for this Black History Month program hosted by the Jamaica Cultural Alliance. I am Beverly White, and it is my honor to speak with my sister in journalism, Barbara Blake Hanna. But before we do, we have to pay respect to the sponsors. The Jamaica Tourist Board, the heartbeat of the world, is helping bring this programming to you today. Also, Stems by MG, who provided my beautiful floral arrangement and is gifted in so many ways. For luxe elegance in floral designs and event planning, look to Stems by MG. And the House of Flavor, who dressed our star today, Barbara Blake Hanna, her ensemble from the creators of Rastafari and Jamaican-inspired clothing. That's the House of Flavor. And finally, my employer, NBC Universal, the NBC television network flagship here on the West Coast. Let's dive right in now to our conversation with the esteemed Barbara Blake Hanna. Good day, Barbara. How are you right now?
Hi, Beverly. I'm so fine and really happy to be seeing you and speaking with you today. I
Yes,
think
and
journalism, indeed. Yes, indeed. Quite a career you've had, young lady. A
Oh,
very
trying
successful
to.
one. And that's really excellent in this day and age to have held a job like that for so long and done so well with it. Nice
Oh,
to meet you again.
likewise, God is good. And thanks to Zoom and technology, we're able to interact today and share your amazing story with all the folks who joined us electronically due to the pandemic. Someday soon, we will meet in person. But until then, let's get to your story. That's the reason we're here today. When African American girls here in the States were admiring Diane Carroll on Julia, she portrayed a nurse in the late 60s, and she was our role model, so to speak. You were truth telling in London, doing journalism. How did you come to journalism in the first place in the UK in 1968? Take us back.
Well, I've been a journalist, I'd say, really all my life because I was born to a father who was a journalist nearly all of his life. So my first job leaving school was on his magazine, and I kind of, was always a journalist. I went to England in 1964 and tried to continue my career as a journalist, but that wasn't so easy. So I started out being a temporary secretary, and then I got some jobs with some of the black newspapers that were starting up and trying to fill a niche. And eventually I got a job with the PR company that handled the Jamaica tourist board account. And in that job as its account executive, I managed to get articles published about Jamaica. Wrote articles. My first one was an article on Jamaican food for the Sunday Times Magazine, which was a great entry into Fleet Street, the best, starting at the top, I would say. And I wrote several more articles for other magazines, newspapers in Britain at that time. That was about the first 4 years I was in Britain. I've kind of covered that in that sentence, that paragraph.
But you transitioned to broadcasting somewhere along the way, having worked for your father's monthly news magazine in your homeland in Jamaica. Your father, Yvonne Blake, if I'm saying it right,
Yes.
he founded the Press Association of Jamaica. Do I have that right?
Yes, he did. He did indeed. The year after I was born, in fact, he set up the Press Association of Jamaica with a couple of his friends. And it still exists today, the Press Association of Jamaica.
That's a powerful legacy. Contrast your time in Jamaica in journalism with your brief run at Thames TV. That's the foundation of our conversation today, is how things didn't go so well at your first broadcast outlet. Let's contrast your Jamaican experience with your time in the UK at Thames.
In Jamaica, I mostly was a print journalist. After I worked with my father's magazine, I worked with a PR company, with an advertising agency in their PR department, writing articles, writing their magazines. And I even did some television, a little bit of news reading. I helped host a quiz show, that kind of work in Jamaica. And it was pleasant and sweet. Television was just starting in Jamaica, really. But when I went to England, England is, the heart of media. British journalism is really the best. Everyone copies it and tries to excel all over the world. It sets a standard. So when I found myself working with Thames Television, it was really starting at the top in television. Thames had just started broadcasting. They just had a franchise to provide programming for the London region, daily programming, news, current affairs, entertainment. And the program I got a job on was a daily magazine program that came on at 6 in the evenings and covered, news and things of interest in and around London. The Today Show, it was called. And the host was Eamon Andrews, who was a well-known personality because he used to host a program called This Is Your Life, which was then the most popular program on television. So that was the program I started work on in television today.
You were the first Black woman broadcaster in the UK, and that is impressive on the face of it. But racist viewers, to my understanding, chased you off your job. Take us back to that time, how you learned about it, and frankly, how that made you feel.
I was really the first Black broadcaster with a regular job on television. It had never really happened before. A couple of persons had been given jobs holding microphones. One, a very, very light skinned Jamaican man whom nobody really would have looked at and considered Black, and another gentleman we've just recently heard about. But it was the first time a Black person had been given a daily, upfront current affairs job. And it wasn't any big thing to me because, as I said, I'd had experience in Jamaica. So it just seemed a perfectly natural thing to do. I'd applied actually for a job as a journalist, thinking they would need people to write stories for this new TV station. They asked me to come in for an audition. I did the audition and they rang me about a week later and said, "We've interviewed 100 persons and we'd like you to be one of the three on screen reporters." I said, "Oh, lovely, that's wonderful." Went along and did my job every day for 9 months. All kinds of very interesting, wonderful stories, interviewing all kinds of people out on the street and in the studio. But after 9 months, when my contract came up for renewal, I was called in by one of the directors and told, "We're not going to renew your contract because every day people call in and say, 'Get that N word off our screens.'" And they used to use that word just as freely as that in those days. "Get her off our screens. We don't want to see that on our screens." They were, in those days, Black people were on television singing or telling jokes or dancing, but not doing something as serious as current affairs, news reading, interviewing people, the serious stuff, and racism was endemic in Britain. In fact, it still is today. Very little has changed. I'm sad to see just the other day on Twitter a note about some young lady who's having a hard time in her job because racism has reared its ugly head again 50 years later. It's interesting that the year that I had this job, 1968, was also the year in which the British Race Relations Act was passed in Parliament. In fact, I even went to Parliament the day that it was debated. But that act didn't change the fact that I was fired, I would say, for racist reasons. There was no one to say no. The station didn't say, "Oh no, we don't agree with these racist reasons. She's doing a good job and we want to do what our government says should be done. We want to do the right thing." They decided no, we let the racists rule. And that seems to still be happening. Racism still takes the prime position, unfortunately, and not just in Britain, all over the world, really, where Europeans, white people are the predominant culture. The, the trend hasn't changed, unfortunately. Hard as we all try to make it different, make it be different, it hasn't changed. In 1968, it certainly hadn't changed. We were accustomed to racism. We expected it. We Jamaicans came to Britain thinking white people will always hate you, be scornful towards you. You've just got to accept it. We inherited that from slavery days, It hadn't yet moved. And it was only in around that time, 1968, the mid 60s, that Blacks in America started rising up against racism. The Black Panthers. We got to know Angela Davis, Malcolm X, um, Martin Luther King. All these things, all these people started speaking out against racism. Cassius Clay said, "Change my name. I'm not going to go to Vietnam and fight no war because right here at home, I don't get the proper respect that I should as a Black man." So we were just hearing this. Black is beautiful was just starting to be spoken about. And we Black people were just beginning to realize, hey, we didn't have to accept it. We could actually be proud of being Black and we could stand up for ourselves. So that was the 60s, and I was around for the start of that, I'm glad to say.
Yes, ma'am. It is always a pleasure to speak with a sister journalist because, you scratch a journalist, you find a historian. And I'm hearing your references to things that resonate here in the States. The struggle is real,
Yes.
as it's a hashtag. The struggle is real, but
Yeah.
obviously it resonated with your brief career at that TV station where you arrived eminently qualified. You wouldn't have held the job in the first place. How did they communicate to you that it was over? And do you recall that meeting, the words that were
Yes,
used?
yes, yes. They just called me into an office and showed me some letters that had come in. And there it was in writing. They said, people call every day, Barbara. And I mean, what could I say? What, what could I say? There was no one to speak up for me, either there in the office or outside in the wider community. It's many years later that I meet Jamaicans who were living in England then, and they tell me, oh, we were so proud of you. We would rush home every evening just to see you on television. We were so proud to see a Jamaican, to see a black face on television. But they didn't write in, they didn't call in, they didn't know they should write in and say how lovely it is. And that's the sad thing. We don't even know. I don't think we are proud enough of our own, and we need to be. Maybe it's happening now, but then it wasn't. We were as ashamed of ourselves as they were, as they hated us. We were ashamed of ourselves. We were ashamed to be a problem for these white people whose country it was. So we put up with it as much as we could, but not all the time, not all the time, not all the time. I had to put up with it then. I went back home, I did some more temporary secretary jobs, and some months later, my agent found me another similar job, this time in Birmingham, where the racism was even more entrenched. They wouldn't rent me a hotel room in Birmingham. I had to come back to London every night and take the train up in the morning, sleep in my little flat, get up early and take the train up to Birmingham in the mornings. No room. You know, um, Racism was just accepted. It was just the natural way of life. Black people were inferior. No knowledge of their history as slave owners, no knowledge of the terrible things that they had done that they should be ashamed of, their ancestors had done that they should be ashamed of in the history of slavery. They had no shame. They still had that arrogance, that superior attitude. Unbelievable, you know?
I want to again harken back to your time at Thames Television because I know you scored significant stories, you did powerful interviews, some positivity had to be in that 9 months experience. Can you share with us just a moment of uplift, stories that stayed with you for all the right reasons, if you care to share?
The story that stays with me the most is interviewing Jack Benny, a famous American comedian. And he came over to London to do some shows, and he was the loveliest man. He insisted on having both us female reporters interviewing, one sitting on either side of him. He was just the loveliest man. And then he invited us to dinner after. Interviewing Jack Benny was the highlight of my experience. Other celebrities we interviewed, I remember doing one with Michael Caine when Bianca Jagger was his girlfriend, and they both came on to do a story about a charity. They were trying to raise funds for something or the other. So we had two famous celebrities. And then I remember one of my first stories was going to the closing down of the Beatles store in Baker Street. The Beatles had bought a store in Baker Street, which is, you know, is Sherlock Holmes' story. And the people who live there are very proper and very Sherlock Holmes. The Beatles had gone in there and painted the outside of the building in psychedelic colors, you know, with hippies floating around and from. The residents were shocked. And they were even more shocked at the people who kept coming into the shop, you know, in bells and flowers in their hair and so on. So they insisted that the shop, that they paint over the outside of the shop. Well, the Beatles said, we're not going to paint over the shop. We're going to close it down. They held a closing down sale and gave away everything in it for free. So you can imagine what the crowd was like that day. I had to cover it.
That sounds like a fun story.
The police had to take me through the crowd inside to get to do the interview. And the only great thing I remember is that I got something free. I got a green leather jacket.
And you anticipated my next question, like, did you have any takeaways besides the memory of that day? That sounds like a splendid story. We're going to take a brief break, Ms. Blake Hannah, so I can remind people why we're here. This is about the Jamaica Cultural Alliance. Remember, today, you as viewers in cyberspace, you have the opportunity to enter our event raffle, a chance to win a Jamaican Cultural Alliance enamel mug, and the winner will be announced after the conclusion of this event on JCA's Facebook page. I just wanted to share that because, you know, a little takeaway for our viewers if they are so inclined to go check out the merchandise and apply for the raffle, all of which is available as we speak on our Facebook page. Again, back to our conversation, ma'am, you mentioned celebrities of that era and the racism of that era. Celebrities come and go. Right now, America is paying attention to a Southern California resident by the name of Meghan Markle, who married into the royal family and then left that country with her husband and their firstborn son, now another baby on the way. Their experiences with racism, it sounds like they parallel some of yours. Are you following what's happening with the
Yes. Oh,
Duke
yes.
Duchess of
I mean,
Sussex? And what are your thoughts on that?
oh, yes. You know, Prince Harry came to Jamaica on one of those royal visits, and he was so loved. He's such a lovely young man. Everyone fell in love with him. He ran a race with Usain Bolt. He hugged up our prime minister, who was a lady at the time. He went to Trenchtown and danced the reggae with Rita Marley. He was such a lovely man. So when we heard that he found this beautiful woman to marry who happened to have a drop of black blood in her that you wouldn't notice if you just looked at her, but when you saw her mother, you could see. We said, oh, that's perfect. She endured so much racism in the media that I can't blame her. I can well understand why she said no more. And what was wonderful was that her husband said, I agree, I will step aside with you. In fact, it looked like he'd been wanting to step aside from that pomp and ceremony for a very long time. Now, that kind of racism is the same racism that 50 years ago made people call the station and say, get that N word off our screens. They were still doing it 50 years later. And the sad thing is, there was no one saying stop. There was no one at that very high level saying stop. It's like no one realizes how terrible racism is. We sat and watched what was happening in your country, Beverly, when a man put his knee on another man's neck and held it there for nearly 9 minutes till he died in front of our very eyes. We couldn't believe it. What we could believe was to see people all over the world, black and white, protesting and saying, finally, stop. Black lives do matter. And I was very heartened to see it happening in the streets of London, the same streets where people had spat at me on the street. There were black, yes, black and white children holding hands, marching in the streets. I was very impressed. This whole issue with Meghan Markle and her husband, Prince Harry, has pointed out how endemic racism is in Britain. And it's still a disgrace. It's still a disgrace. It makes me ashamed for the fact that my country, Jamaica, is still ruled by the Crown of England. We still are a British colony, so to speak. There's a Governor General who represents the Queen, and he is the head of state in our country. I mean, other Caribbean countries have severed themselves from the British monarchy. Our governments keep promising to do that, and they still haven't. We're 60 years from independence, and we're still in that position. And what's been happening in Britain recently reminds us that nothing has changed. Nothing has changed from 50 years ago when they said to Barbara, "Come off our screens, you N-word. We don't want you there." So Meghan Markle is just an indication. She's just a symbol that nothing has changed. And I'm really proud to see the strength with which she and her husband have stepped away from that and set an example of what should not be happening in that country. And it's going to make a lot change. It's definitely made everyone look into themselves to see, because Harry was always the best of that family, the most favored of that family, the nicest. And they've lost him now. He has finally found someone he loves and who loves him. And she is Black. She proudly says, "Yes, I'm Black. Don't look at the color of my skin, how light I am. I am Black and proud of it. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud." That was the song of my era.
Right.
I went and saw James Brown do that on the stage at the Royal Albert Hall. Yes, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. Yeah, and it still resonates today.
All right. I can still hear the joy in your voice from your time in the UK. It wasn't all bad, obviously. Let's talk about some more of the stories that you covered. I think I remember a reference to Sammy Davis Jr. Did you also speak to him in your journalism journey? Tell us
Yes,
about that.
that was one of my Sunday Times articles. The Sunday Times had a lovely series called Me and My Money, where they interviewed celebrities about, tell me about your money. And they sent me to interview Sammy Davis Jr. He was at Pinewood Studios making a film, and it was lovely. I was driven out there, had lunch with him, and he told me all about his wealth as he took off piece by piece his jewels. He was a really nice man. I had, in fact, met him earlier in Jamaica several years before when he'd come to do a show, but he even remembered. So it was nice writing that article. I did another nice one, Me and My Money, with Jacqueline Suzanne, the lady who wrote that book, The Valley of the Dolls.
Right.
And she was lovely. The nice story I remember about her is that I was interviewing her in her hotel room, the Dorchester, and she said, "Oh, just a minute, I have to show you the present my husband gave me." And she went into the dressing room and came back out with a sort of brown khaki colored cloth coat. I thought, "Oh, nice, a coat." And she opened it up and it was lined in mink.
Wow.
Yes, that was pretty impressive. I was impressed.
So before they created the show here in the States called MTV on the MTV channel rather, it was I think Cribs or something where the stars would flex and show their baubles and their bling. You're telling me you did a series of articles for the Sunday Times in the same vein?
Yes, yes, yes. That was the 60s. That was before my Thames television job. The Sunday Times was a really great newspaper to work for. It was the #1 paper in Fleet Street. And there was a very excellent editor, Harold Evans. He was a lovely man. And he just made the paper the nicest place on Fleet Street. His parties, the parties he would throw at the Sunday Times every now and then were the parties on Fleet Street. And he was just the loveliest man. The cookery section, the film section, the current affairs, the opinions, everything about the Sunday Times was the best paper. It was really nice to work with it. Every time I got an assignment, I was like, Ray.
So your journalism journey wasn't all bad, but again, the Times TV piece was the negativity there.
No, love is the most important quality in life. And I've been fortunate to have that as my objective at all times, to give love and to seek love and to look for the love in people. And therefore I had lots of friends. I had lots of white friends, lots of black friends. I had friends. So my friends helped to cushion life for me. But when, here am I trying to earn a living, to pay my rent and to be a person, and to find myself having to apologize to my friends for what seemed like a contagious disease, this thing called Blackness. I was very disappointed, When the opportunity came to leave England and go back to Jamaica, I was really glad. I got a really wonderful opportunity, which was to be the PR for Jamaica's first feature film, The Harder They Come.
Yes.
And it flew me to Jamaica for the premiere. It flew me to Venice for the Venice Film Festival. That was quite an experience. But being flown to Jamaica for the premiere was heaven. It happened on my birthday as well, so that was even nicer. And when I saw the film showed me a Jamaica I didn't even know existed. The Jamaica of reggae and Rasta.
Mm-hmm.
I just had to come back home and find out what that was all about. And
I was in college when that came out. Jimmy Cliff
yes,
is iconic, and we can go into that in a moment. But I have to pay respect, ma'am.
Friend.
Okay, please let him know he's got big fans here in the States. I have to pay respect to our host because again, this is all about the Jamaica Cultural Alliance, a 501c3 nonprofit based here in Los Angeles that is devoted to the expansion and enrichment and knowledge and awareness of Jamaican culture and heritage, as in the conversation we're having right now. A sister of journalism, a proud product of Jamaica, JCA relies solely on donations, and it is our honor to include Ms. Barbara Blake Hanna in this conversation to amplify the beauty that is Jamaica. So thank you, ma'am, for putting it all in context for us. Again, the JCA encourages everybody in sound of my voice, the sound of Miss Blake Hanna's voice, to please visit their newly updated website, check out their gift shop, check out their newly added merchandise. And remember that all the proceeds support JCA programs and causes. www.jamaicaculture.org/shop, SHOP. Again, that's why we're here. They brought us together. I've never met you, Miss Blake Hanna. I look forward to the day when I can, not just elbow bump because of the pandemic, but embrace you again as a sister in journalism and quite a storyteller. The time is flying right now, but I want to make sure because you knew we were coming. You knew this was in the works. What's on your heart right now? What do you want the viewers, our worldwide audience, to know about your time in the UK and what came next?
I think what I want people to know is that we still have a long way to go to achieve that world of love, that world of equality. But we must never give up trying to make it happen. We must never be satisfied for less than that, with less than that. Love is, the Christus said, he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? And he said, love. And he didn't mean love as a noun, he meant love as a verb, to love. That's really what's important. And that's my campaign at all times. Black Lives Matter has come at a very important time, just as my life was brought to the fore once again last year. Black Lives Matter just started to happen. And I find that I'm part of that movement now. And therefore, I speak out as much as I can on those issues because the world is supposed to be about love. We are supposed to love one another. And if we use that as a foundation, we are able to eradicate racism, hatred, all of those negatives that make our lives so hard to live. You know, I just want to see happiness, and it's always being blocked by this terrible thing called racism. It's such a shame. So I think if my campaign is about anything, it's about love. It's an anti-racism campaign for love, and all that that means. You know, the ills of slavery have to be accounted for and compensated, and have all of those errors have to be wiped out and replaced with a foundation of love. And that love goes all the way to even loving our country, this planet Earth, that we're polluting with plastics, we're polluting by destroying our environment, our air, our forests. We, we need more love. That's really, that's really what, if anything, that's my word, that four-letter word, love.
That's powerful. But before I let you go, I'd like to drop back to something that was added in the chat room. We've got lots of people listening and watching. And someone wants to know about your time in Birmingham. That isn't that community predominantly Black? And if so, why did you have such a hard time finding housing there?
Birmingham very much is a Black community, but it was a reluctantly Black community. Black people had gone there for jobs, but the white people didn't necessarily want us there. Um, I mean, I'm sure I could have found a house to live in on the outskirts of Birmingham, but you know, as a working person, you need to be literally in the center, and within the center, there was just no accommodation available. Um, it's interesting. I went back 10 years later and got asked to make a film, which I called Race, Rhetoric, Rastafari. And when I went up to Birmingham to film, I found that all the Black children, the teenagers who had been babies when I was working there, the majority of them had become Rastafari because that was what had given them their Black identity. They had to overcome racism. Rasta was their education, as it had been for me. The Sidewalk University of Rastafari is what taught me my Blackness and enabled me to see my Black pride, to know my Black pride. And that's what Birmingham is today. I think it's more mixed today, and the racism isn't quite as strong, but that was the problem in Birmingham then. Enoch Powell was the MP. I mean, the man who said we have to stop immigration because the rivers will run with blood if we let any more Black people into this country. That was Enoch Powell's home, Birmingham. So, you know, no wonder no one would rent me a room, you know what I mean? No more Blacks. And they didn't say Blacks in those days, you know?
Yes, ma'am. It's their loss that they didn't have you as a neighbor. But I am endeared to you, grateful to you for your pioneering spirit and just the love that you share. In closing, I want to let people know that Barbara Blake Hannah is now the name of a new prize being awarded by the Press Gazette in the UK. I know you know this, ma'am, but I want to amplify it for our viewers. It recognizes emerging journalists from Black, Asian, and other ethnic minority backgrounds, and it is fitting that this pioneer, I quoting from something I read about you, that you're hopeful the award will address diversity because only 0.2% of UK journalists are Black, as yet Blacks make up 3.3% of the population there. So you're seeking better than parity and equality and love. We'll leave it at that. Ms. Barbara Blake Hannah, it has been a tremendous honor to share this time with you, ma'am. And it is my honor to one more time share information about our sponsors because we couldn't do this without support. The Jamaica Tourist Board, the heartbeat of the world. Stems by MG, from whom I got this beautiful floral arrangement for Luxe Elegance and more, based here in Southern California. The House of Flavor, an international design firm who, as I understand, dressed Ms. Blake Hanna today.
Yes.
The fabulous Jamaican color ensemble. Yes, you can spin around if you want, but thank you, ma'am. And finally, my employer, NBC Universal, for enabling me to be a part of your day today. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Miss Barbara Blake Hanna, for your devotion to storytelling, to truth-telling, and just for being you. It's a real honor, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Jamaica Cultural Alliance. I am so honored, especially to have been asked to be in this program. And it's been a pleasure being here and speaking with you, ma'am. Much love.
And love back to you. Yeah. You all be well. Stay safe.